Hello everyone. I feel like I'm kind of in my flop era when it comes to reading and booktube. I feel like I've been in such a big kind of like content slump. I also feel like I'm in my flop era when it comes to my health. Everything's been a little bit more difficult than it usually is, but I am finally here to talk about the books that I read in August and September. Yes, I didn't do an August wrap up. I ended up just running out of time and it didn't feel right to do like an August wrap up when September was nearly over. So I've combined the two and now we have the August and September wrap up. These are the 16 books that I read in the past 2 months. I'm not sure how this wrap up is going to go because I usually do all my wrap ups like on the 1st. Like I will film them on the 1st of the next month. Now it's like literally the 8th of October. In my mind, I read these books like a year ago. So I don't know how my brain is going to really remember all these, but I'm going to try my best. Let's just go through them. These are 16 books I read over the past 2 months. So first of all, if anyone remembers, back in August, I did a reading vlog where I read only books with yellow covers for a week. And in that video, I read 3 books. The first one I read was The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. This is an adult romance. It is enemies to lovers in a sense, like it's bad first impression to lovers essentially, with a sprinkle of fake dating. We basically follow our main character Jess, who is a single mother. She has this encounter with this man in this coffee shop. He's very rude, but he's very handsome, and he also happens to be a scientist and has started up this company where it's basically like a dating app, but you put in your DNA and it matches you up with other people's DNA. And funnily enough, our main character Jess and this man, that are like 100% match. So they have to fake date in order to like, you know, also promote this company. So I gave this a 3 stars. I thought there were bits about it that were really fun, but I just felt the 2 main characters to be very underdeveloped. I always have a massive soft spot for single parent characters. So I really did like Jess and all of the obstacles she had to overcome. But I do feel like when it comes to romances like this and it's enemies to lovers, it really does need to be dual perspective, because our main character, or the love interest River, he just didn't feel like a fully fleshed out character, and I just didn't genuinely believe that he even liked Jess in the first place, because we never really got to hear from his side. And yes, Grumpy Sunshine, I get it, it's like a fun trope, but you can only be so stoic and cold without me believing that you just like hate this main character, you just hate this woman. So I spent a big majority of the novel like not liking him and thinking that he just like didn't like our main character at all. So I feel like it was a really missed opportunity to not make this dual perspective. I know that Christina Lauren, they don't do dual perspective all that often, but I feel like maybe they should, because I just feel like it would have made this book so much better. So I did end up giving this a 3 stars. Then I read Yellowface, which I absolutely loved. This is by Rebecca F. Kuang, and it is an adult, like, I don't even want to say literary fiction, like it's a thriller. It's a thriller, basically. I feel like a lot of people would describe it as literary fiction because of the author and how skilled she is as a writer, but like nothing about this felt particularly literary fiction to me, other than just like the themes and the topic. But it didn't feel like a super literary book. It felt like a fun, ridiculous satire, which also had like a lot of thriller elements. But basically we follow our main character June. She is a writer and she has this frenemy called Athena. Athena is an author who is Chinese American, and she just gets skyrocketed to literary stardom as soon as she graduates Yale. But June is one of her classmates turned friends, and she has not had a lot of luck when it comes to the publishing industry. And basically one night there's a freak accident, Athena dies, but June ends up stealing Athena's manuscript for her like latest novel, which no one has seen, so no one knows what her latest novel was going to be about. June ends up sending it to her publisher and ends up getting it published herself under her own name, so basically stealing the entire story. But the thing is, June is white and Athena is not, and Athena's manuscript was basically about a part of Chinese history that not a lot of people talk about, and how the Chinese laborers were treated by the English in the war. So Athena gets a lot of praise for, you know, telling this story that like isn't hers, but there's also a lot of backlash about the fact that she has like written this story that isn't really hers to be told. So there's a lot of backlash about that, and we are in the head of June, like we are reading from her perspective. So a lot of the things that she says are just like absolutely ridiculous. Like she is a very racist human, and I feel like Rebecca F. Kuang probably just had the best time writing this satire. I feel like in this novel she managed to like address a lot of the criticism that she has received as a very young like Chinese American author. I really liked this book, and I feel like a lot of people who are really big fans of Rebecca F. Kuang were really underwhelmed, but I just think that this just proves that like Rebecca F. Kuang is multifaceted as an author and extremely talented. Yes, she can do something very academic like Babel, she can do the historical fantasy, and she can also do humor and something that's not as serious while still having like quite serious themes, but being immensely readable and just an absolute page turner at the same time. I really love this. I love Rebecca F. Kuang, so I did give this 5 stars. I then read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which is the second book in this series about a time-traveling cafe in Tokyo. I really loved the first book. I thought it was really fun, and basically these books are essentially like 4 anecdotes about different people who go into this cafe and use the time-traveling table to either see loved ones or friends or give people some sort of warning about the future. I feel like they're always very beautiful, they're always very bittersweet, and they're really well written, but I do feel like by the second book it just felt a little bit repetitive for me. I have read the first book, so obviously I knew how the cafe worked, but I felt like in every single one of these 4 anecdotes, the cafe and like the logistics of it was explained to me and explained to the reader again, and I just feel like it got really kind of boring. So I really enjoyed the first 2 stories because I was like, yes, this is very beautiful, I really like love these stories, I love being back in this world. But then by the time we get to the next couple ones, I'm like, I'm just getting a bit bored because half of this story is like explaining the cafe to us again. So it just did feel very repetitive. I do have the 3rd book on my TBR shelf and I do still want to read it, but this one did end up being a 3-star when the first book in the series was a 4-star. So yeah, I just didn't love this one as much, and now I'm not as inclined to pick up the next book in the series, even though I think the writing was like very beautiful. Then I read 3 Briar Yu books for my Patreon series read along, which we finished in August. I read The Risk, The Play, and The Deer, the last 3 books in the Briar Yu series by Al Kennedy, which is also at Briar University and is connected to the off-campus series. The Risk is Enemies to Lovers, and they're all kind of like standalones. Like you can read them standalone. I'm a completionist when it comes to series, so like I want to read them in order and I want to read all of them. But basically in this one we follow Brenna and Jake, and it's Enemies to Lovers, Fake Dating. This was a reread for me and I rated this 4 stars. I think I rated it 3 stars the first time, but this time around I rated it 4 stars because it's just so much fun. Like it's so unserious and just such a good time. I feel like with all these books they are just like really fun to read, and like do they have problems? Yes. Are they very cheesy at times? Yes. And are there cringy lines? Absolutely there are, but they're all so much fun. So I really didn't have anything bad to say about this other than the fact that there are a few cringy lines. I feel like it's a really well structured romance. I loved our 2 main characters. I really loved their chemistry, and I feel like the way their relationship developed was really strong. Like the structure of the novel and the pacing of the novel was so good and kept me entertained, and their chemistry lasted the whole way through. So I really loved this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I then read The Play, which I gave 4 stars as well. I think I actually really enjoyed this one as well. And this is Hunter and Demi's book. Demi's basically going through a breakup. She found her boyfriend cheating on her, and Hunter is going through a moment of celibacy while he concentrates on hockey. Hunter and Demi end up working together on the school project and they become very fast friends. And then once Demi breaks up with her boyfriend and she's on the hunt for a rebound, and she really wants to get with Hunter because they're obviously very attracted to each other, and Hunter's like, no, I can't, like I have to be celibate, but he's obviously fighting his attraction as well. So it's a really fun kind of enemies to lovers novel. I really liked the parts where they were friends. It was really sweet and I really bought their friendship, and it made their kind of lead up into a sort of friends with benefits situation, like romance situation, really fun. Also, there is no 3rd act breakup in this novel, and so that was a big plus for me. I feel like it was just, again, really well done. I didn't like Hunter in the other books, but this book really made me like him. I feel like he had a lot of really strong character development in this. The one thing that stopped it from being a 5 stars or my favorite in the series was I feel like sometimes some of the behaviors and moves that Demi made when she was trying to make a play for Hunter was slightly inappropriate. I did have to be like, okay, if the tables were turned, things would be a very different story. But I mean, I feel like with this series, I do quite often have to shut my feminist brain off. And that is okay. I still really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then finally I read The Dare, which is Connor and Taylor's love story. I felt like this one was a bit messy, unfortunately. The first half of the novel I really loved. I was like, oh my god, we have a plus size main character. Like, thank god. Connor's giving like fun fuckboy energy, but also like really good guy. Like, this is gonna be such a good time. This is another fake dating story, by the way. Taylor's in a sorority and all the girls are really mean to her. She's very insecure. And Connor like hears all this and doesn't like it and like sticks up for her and pretends to be her boyfriend because he's like the hot cool guy on campus. Yeah, that he ends up falling for her and all that sort of stuff. I feel like, yeah, with this one it was a really strong first half, and then it just got really messy. Pacing and the structure of the novel was all over the place. There were all these side plots that just feel like kind of overtook the romance, and then with these side plots it was all leading to this big climax, but then the climax didn't even happen like on the page. I'm not talking about the romance and the sex for this. I'm talking about like the actual like conflicts that our characters were going through. So it did feel very anticlimactic as a novel, especially when it was so frustrating that we had to read about this B plot and it overshadowed the main romance anyway. I also do feel like while I loved that we had a plus size main character and, you know, a male main character who absolutely loved her body so much, I just felt like this book wasn't as empowering as I would have liked. I'm someone who, I'm not like tiny, you know, like I wouldn't say that like I'm the same size as this character, but she kept talking about like her big boobs and the struggles that she's had with big boobs. Same girl, I get it. I'm a very busty woman and I'm definitely like not the smallest person out there, and I felt like I could feel quite empowered by this, but I feel like the amount of times that our main character Taylor talked about how ugly and hideous she was as a larger girl just felt a little bit like it got a bit much for me, and I feel like it could have been really triggering to some people who maybe do deal with body image issues. I just felt like, you know, we've waited so long for Elle Kennedy in the series to give us a plus size main character, and then they just make her entire personality be like hating her body. It just didn't feel triumphant to me, and it just didn't really feel like she overcame it all that much by the end either. I don't know, it just made me feel really sad, unfortunately. I just didn't like hearing her talk so much shit about her body and like her eating habits. So yeah, this was definitely an interesting read. I did really love Connor though, and I did love Taylor despite all that, so I did end up giving it 3 stars, but it definitely is the more disappointing book in the series. After that I read Mr. Wrong Number by Lynn Painter. I ended up giving this 1 star. I really did not like this. This is an adult romance. We basically follow our 2 main characters, Olivia and Colin. It's basically like a hidden identity kind of romance. Olivia is Colin's best friend's little sister, and everyone thinks she's an absolute mess, and that's because she is. They end up having like a wrong number exchange and they don't realize that it's each other, and they start up this kind of like text relationship. Colin finds out pretty fast that the wrong number is Olivia, yet he still continues to pursue like this texting relationship. He tries to shut it down a couple of times to be like a good guy, but he still continues to text her. So whenever a relationship is based off deception, I get very upset. Like, I get annoyed. Also, Olivia was like the worst main character I've ever read in my life. Very selfish, very childish, and everything that was going wrong in her life, like she would always say like she's the unluckiest person and the universe hates her, but everything that went wrong in her life was like her own fault and very easily fixable. She like lied to get a job when she very easily could have just like not lied, and she still probably would have gotten the job. Like, it was just a miscommunication thing, and she just like went on with the lie. She doesn't clean up after herself. Like, she's just so messy, and she just like, she drinks Colin's $300 bottle of tequila and then doesn't like it, so like pours it down the drain, and he's like, why would you do that? And then she gets angry at him and he has to apologize. Like, that is just ridiculous to me. She was just evil in my eyes. And then by the end of it, there's not even any character development where she changes. Colin ends up falling in love with like her carefree nature. No, she's awful. I really hated this book. I cannot sit by and read like characters like this and root for them and believe that they are actually likable in the end. I just can't do it. So I did give this 1 star. This was my second chance that I gave Lynn Painter, and so far 2 of the books that I've read by her have been 1 stars, so I am no longer going to be reading this author. And I don't have any books by her on my TBR shelf, so thank God for that. Next, I read a book For my Patreon, this was my August book club pick, and I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, and I gave this 3 stars. It was kind of disappointing for me. This is an adult horror novel, and basically it is about 2 siblings. Their parents die in a car crash and they have to go and sell their house. They have to sell the house they grew up in. But their parents were puppeteers, and the house is full of puppets, and there is one puppet in particular that made the childhood very, very traumatic and caused a lot of friction between the brother and the sister. I think this book like had a cool concept, but it's just really unfortunate because my expectations were a haunted house story. I really love haunted house novels, and this just wasn't that. I feel like I had to suspend my disbelief slightly too much. Like, it just felt a little bit ridiculous, and I felt like the violence and the gore just got really boring and really repetitive. I feel like there was not really a whole lot of tension to lead up to these action scenes. I really liked parts of this book though. I really liked the relationship and like seeing the more human sides of these characters and hearing about this family trauma and this generational trauma and like these family secrets. I loved that aspect of the book so much. But in terms of like the actual horror scenes, I just didn't find all that scary because it was just so violent, and that's not scary to me. That's just like, it feels a bit cheap. Unfortunately, yeah, I did give this 3 stars. If it was like, you know, one half of the book was like really good to me and then the other half of the book wasn't, so I just feel like I had to meet them in the middle with 3 stars. But yeah, there is a full reading blog and live show for this on my Patreon. After that, I read Fake Dates and Mooncakes by Shirley, which is a YA romance. It's between our 2 main characters, Dylan and Theo. They have this chance encounter and end up falling in love very quickly. They fake date because I believe Theo's like super wealthy. He needs a date to his cousin's wedding and invites Dylan along, and Dylan's kind of like overwhelmed because he's never like had this sort of wealth before. He also works in his aunt's takeaway shop, and there's just a lot to do with food in here. I felt like all the descriptions of food were really good, but I gave this 2 stars. The thing is, I never read YA romance unless it's queer, which is why I picked up this one, because this is a gay love story. Love that. But I just feel like YA romance is never for me. It's always too cheesy and a little bit unbelievable, and I just never really like the characters. And in this case, it was so insta-love, it kind of threw me off guard. Like, our characters didn't even know each other and already they were in love, and it felt like just not very well developed at all. Another thing that really like kind of got on my nerves is Blackpink. Very fun K-pop band. Love a lot of their songs. I really like Blackpink. They were mentioned probably in every single chapter. Like, I would say they were probably mentioned about 20 times in this book. So many references to Blackpink that it just kind of felt a little bit fan servicey. It kind of felt like, if you're a K-pop stan, pick up this book right now, just by throwing in like mentions of Blackpink 24/7. It just doesn't like make up for like the bad writing. Do you know what I mean? It kind of felt like how I feel about like Swiftie books or books by Swiftie authors when there's just heaps of Taylor Swift references. I'd never liked that, and I didn't like when it was Blackpink either. So yeah, I unfortunately gave this one 2 stars, and not just because of the Blackpink thing, but just because of like the structure of the novel and how just underdeveloped and half-baked it felt. The only thing I really liked was the descriptions of food. Yeah. Anyways, I also barely remember anything of this, and I read this in like September, I'm pretty sure, so yeah, 2 stars. After that, I read To Hate Adam Connor by Ellen Mays, which I actually read in one of my most recent weekly reading vlogs. This is an enemies to lovers romance novel, which I gave 2 stars as well. Oh my god, guys, this is why I'm in my flop era, because I'm reading flops. I'm only really reading flops. Basically, this, yeah, enemies to lovers, we follow our main character Lucy. She's staying with her friend Olive and Olive's partner after she's gone through a breakup, and she lives next door to Adam Connor, who's a very famous movie star. She one day saves his son, but she only saves his son because she was like stalking Adam and like peering over his fence and saw when the son was in danger. So they have this like enemies situation, but then she ends up being like the babysitter, and they end up having this like enemies to lovers fall in love moment. I rated this 2 stars just because I hated Lucy, our main character. I couldn't get behind the stalking aspect of it. Like, I just can't forgive that so easily. And I also feel like if she was a man, she would be in prison. Also, the way that she talked about like big penises so much just made me uncomfortable. Like, yes, I'm a prude, but like not that much of a prude. Like, you can talk about like male genitalia in front of me, but like the way she'd go on about big penises, it just felt like I could not be friends with someone like that. So like, just hearing her talk about how much she needs a big penis, stop. Babe, stop. And she, like, the way she objectified Adam, like before she even knew him, like, it was just kind of disgusting. Like, the way she spoke about him and sexualized him when he's like with his son. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. No. I felt like the book got better as it went on, but I just didn't really like any of the writing style. I felt like the humor was just not my sense of humor, and I just didn't end up loving it all that much. Yeah, I don't really have that much else to say about it. It's a 2-star for me. I don't recommend it. Yeah, after that I read The Wife Upstairs by Frida McFadden, which is a thriller, and I gave this one 3 stars. Basically, we follow our main character Sylvia. She ends up getting this job working for this woman Victoria and her husband. Victoria has had this horrible accident. She fell down the stairs and she needs a carer. Sylvia ends up being that carer for her while also starting up some sort of relationship with the husband. If it sounds familiar to you, it's very similar to Verity by Colleen Hoover. Like, it's basically the same book. Sylvia ends up reading Victoria's diary because Victoria has asked her to, and it turns out the husband is probably not all that he seems, and Victoria's story is probably not all that it seems either. Like, we kind of have to choose who to believe. I thought the book was definitely a page turner. It was really fun, but definitely very predictable at the same time. It also got really frustrating. Like, I just wanted to scream at our main character. She was just so annoying, and yeah, I just didn't end up loving her. But with Frida McFadden's books, they're always so addictive. Like, I loved the fast-paced writing style, and I loved the plot. So even though it was similar to Verity, I still gave it 3 stars. Like, it was still fun. Anyways, I'm sorry, like I said before, I'm in kind of like my flop era when it comes to my health, and I'm getting really dizzy. So I'm gonna go through these next ones pretty fast. The next 3 books I read for a Patreon video. I did a 24-hour readathon with a TBR chosen by my patrons, and I read 3 books for that. First one was Divine Arrivals by Rebecca Ross. I absolutely loved this. I gave it 5 stars. This is a YA historical fantasy, but I would say that it's quite like light fantasy. Like, the world itself is magical, but our characters aren't, and I really loved that. I love these like human, non-magical like people, and then like a magical world. Like, that's kind of my favorite kind of fantasy sometimes. Like, it's not super high fantasy, but it's not like urban fantasy either, where like the fantasy world is hidden from society. Basically, we follow our 2 main characters. They're 2 rival journalists. Basically, our main character, Iris, her brother has gone off to war and she doesn't know where he is. So she writes like letters to him and puts them in her wardrobe. But the letters keep disappearing, and then one day she gets a response, and it is from her rival. His name is Roman. He's amazing. I love them. Basically, there's a war going on. It's a war between 2 gods, and Iris is just a bit stressed, and she ends up like trying to look for her brother. It's just very epic. Like, it is a love story. Like, the romance in here is so beautiful. I would say it's more heavy on the romance than it actually is on like the fantasy elements, but it is a duology, so I'm sure we're going to see more of that in the sequel, which I think is coming out this month or next month. I'm not totally sure. I really loved this. I thought it was so whimsical. It was so heartfelt. I cried at several moments. The characters were so well developed, and if you're looking for like a really good fantasy, or you want to get into fantasy for the first time, I highly recommend this book. It felt so cinematic. Like, it felt like a movie. Like, the hallucinations were strong with this one when I was reading this. Like, it was so good. Then I read another thriller. I read Shiver by Ali Reynolds. I also gave this 3 stars. This was like way longer than it needed to be, but basically we follow 2 different timelines in this story. We follow our main character Mila. She's gone to this reunion at this like ski resort with some of her old friends that 10 years ago she used to do like snowboarding competitions with, but also 10 years ago her like frenemy and like biggest rival in the snowboarding competitions, she like died. And so they're kind of all brought back to this place. Like, they've kind of like been deceived back here, and the whole point of this thing is to like kind of like find out what happened to this girl 10 years ago. It's always awkward because there's always like one timeline that is better than the other sometimes, and for this one, like, I was so invested in the timeline 10 years ago because it was like very like evil lesbians energy, but like the current timeline I just like wasn't as interested in, and I felt like the current timeline was really boring. The mystery unraveling was fun, but in terms of like the actual tension in the current timeline, it just wasn't as interesting. That's probably why like the current timeline was so boring, because that was like the tense, like what's gonna happen, oh my god, all the lights have gone out. And then the past timeline was like the mystery, actually like we're finding out what happened. So I just felt that to be like more fun than like the present one. I also felt like it was incredibly predictable, and a lot of the characters, like especially the male characters, there was like no differences between them. They were just like different names on a page for me. Apart from that though, the plot was really good. I really was invested in that past timeline, and I also just like found it fun. Like, it was fun and silly. I'm never gonna be like, wow, my favorite thriller ever, but it was fun and silly and it did what I needed it to do. So 3 stars. And the last book I read for that 24-hour readathon was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I actually didn't finish this in the 24-hour readathon. I started it, but I ended up finishing it on my own later. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I definitely see why people love it, but I also like don't love it as much as everyone else. But it was still like 4-star read for me. Like that was a good book. It was a good solid book. Basically everyone knows what this is about. Like everyone's reading this at the moment. Basically we follow our main character Violet. She is the daughter of this like very famous, like very well respected general who's a dragon rider, and Violet, when she wants to be a scribe, is forced to go to this like military academy, be a dragon rider, and there she meets Xaden, who is like the son of a traitor who now has forced to fight on like the good side, and obviously like there's rivalry there, but a little romance ends up happening. I thought this would be way more romance heavy than it was. It was definitely like very heavy high fantasy. I really liked all of like the classes. I love a military school. I think it was really fun, but my favorite part obviously was like the dragons. Like the dragons definitely made it for me. The fact that like the dragons had such strong personalities and were such strong characters, I really loved that. I loved the world that like Rebecca Yarros has created, but I just feel like there are so many books like this. I just don't really understand why like this one has the hype when I feel like there are so many other books I've read that are kind of exactly like this. I don't know. I still liked it. I still thought it was good. I do feel like the first 150 pages really struggled to get into. I know that this was the first time Rebecca Yarros is writing fantasy. I know that they don't usually write fantasy, so I feel like there was a lot of information dumping. I feel like that some of the way the information was dumped was, you know, creative, but it was still information dumping at the end of the day. So I really did struggle to get into it at the first 150 pages. I found it like pretty boring and pretty like, what the fuck is happening? But then towards the end it really ramped up, and then there was some like really crazy plot twists at the end, one of which I saw coming, and another one which I was like, oh my god, gobsmacked. So now I do really want to read the sequel. Like I know it kind of, the way I'm talking about it sounds like I hate it. I loved it. I thought it was really fun. It's just like the other 5 stars that I have in this pile I just like a bit better, but it was still good, and I cannot wait to read the sequel, especially after that final plot twist. Like that was so good. So I understand why people like this. I do. I'm just not one of the die-hard fans, but I do understand. It's good. Then I read The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This was my Patreon book club book for September, and I gave this 2 stars. This is the first 2-star read I've had for Patreon. So there's a full reading vlog for this on my Patreon and another live show. But basically this is an enemies to lovers. We follow our main character Carolina, and she is a wedding planner who got left at the altar like 5 years ago, and then she ends up getting this amazing job opportunity, but she has to work with her ex-fiance's brother, and her ex-fiance's brother is the one that kind of like convinced her ex-fiance to like leave her at the altar. So it's an enemies to lovers situation here, but they kind of have to work together to like get this job, because he's also in this rivalry with his brother. It's like very convoluted for what it is, to be honest. Like the first 50 pages, like setting it up, I was like, okay, it's a bit much, and I really didn't even understand what the 2 brothers did, like what was their job. I didn't even know. I felt like this book was really silly. There are parts of it I loved. For example, our main character is Brazilian, Carolina's Brazilian, and I loved hearing about all the food and like her culture. I found like those were the most interesting parts of the book, but I felt like they weren't very well developed characters, and I felt like Max, our male main character, was too perfect. He really didn't have any flaws. There were also just moments in this book that like, it's really cringe. Like our female main character would like make a joke, and then Max, he'd be like, oh my god, where did I find this woman? She's like the funniest human ever. Like she looks like that, curves like that, and she also is so funny. But like the joke she made, like my face reading it was like so not funny to me, just so not my sense of humor. And I know that that's me just like not meshing with the author's sense of humor. Like we just don't share a sense of humor, but like there have been times where I've like, it's been more acceptable than this, and it's still been not my sense of humor. I also feel like the dirty talk, no. The sex scenes, no. Like I kind of blocked a lot of this book out because like, no. I also feel like this was just kind of like a big combination and salad of tropes, and sometimes I just feel like a book needs to be a little bit more original than that. I don't know. I actually, when I first finished it, like was gonna give it 3 stars, but then like I just got talking about it with my patrons and we ended up giving it all 2 stars collectively. It just wasn't very fun to me, but yeah. Very unfortunate, 2-star read, yeah. And then the final book for this video, thank God, just because I'm getting very headachy. Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. I gave this 3 stars. This was a pretty fun adult rom-com. We follow our main character Phoebe. Her dad has recently died and she moves back home and she believes her neighbor is a serial killer, but she's also obsessed with true crime, so she's like, her mind just goes places. But she ends up like getting to know him and she's like, oh actually, and they start this kind of like friends to lovers kind of situation. They definitely have big crushes on each other and like it's quite sweet. I feel like this book is actually very, very heartfelt. Phoebe's journey is really, really fun, like her kind of coming to terms with her childhood, stuff that she did when she was a child with her like ex-best friend. Like she's moving back home after not living there for so long and having to come to terms with like her dad dying, repairing her relationship with her brother. Like these things were all really, really beautiful and really sweet. The one thing for me, she's a PhD student and it's about true crime. And I don't fuck with true crime. I think true crime, the media and the speculation of true crime and the entertainment value of true crime, I don't fuck with it, like on a moral level, but also on a scaredy cat level. I just think true crime can be like very insensitive sometimes. I mean, just look at the fucking like Jeffrey Dahmer TV show, like, yeah. I just don't fuck with true crime, and there was so much information about true crime in here, and like I don't judge anyone for being a true crime girly. Like I get it, it's just not personally for me. Like it's a personal thing, like it's just not an interest of mine. So the fact that it was in here so much was a bit much, and also there were so many pop culture references, and all of those things kind of brought it down to a 3-star for me. But if it didn't have those things, it would probably be a strong 4-star, because I thought the character journeys were like really beautiful, especially Phoebe's, even though she's like obsessed with true crime. But yeah, I gave it 3 stars, and it was a good way to finish September. So these are all the books that I read over the past 2 months. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a while since I've done a wrap up, so I don't really know how this has gone, but I still hope you enjoy. While I am in my flop era, I'm still working really hard to try and create good content. A lot of the content that I do have I have been working on quite hard recently, is on my Patreon. So if you do want to check out my Patreon, that's linked down below. You get 3 exclusive videos a month, 3 live shows, a bunch of other stuff as well. It's very cute. Also, all my socials are linked down below if you want to follow me elsewhere and see what I get up to. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate you all. I promise I will have more videos out. This flop era is going to end. We're heading into summer. It's going to be hot girl summer season for me very soon, and you will get fun content from me. Love you all. Love you all so much. Hope you have the best day ever, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.